How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I have got a very special guest for you all. Today, I'm joined by a strength conditioning coach and writer. He's written for Elitefts, mumbling my words, Breaking Muscle, and Kabuki Strength. Today, I am joined by the one and only Daniel DeBrocke. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. I guess to start, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the invitation, so I'm looking forward to having a chat.
Yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. But how are you? What's been happening in your world recently?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Things are pretty boring for me at the moment, actually. I just finished up a program that I was doing. Um, yeah, I was taking a marketing program, which is, kind of random a little bit, but obviously for business, it's going to be kind of an important thing. So I've mostly been dedicating my time to that. So it's honestly just been school, training, sleeping, eating, all that kind of boring stuff. I guess I should ask, can I curse on here?
Of course you can. Of
Okay.
course you
All right. Cool. Sounds good.
can.
But yeah.
So oh, cool. Well, I obviously did a little bit of a brief introduction there. I know from seeing the presentations that you've done at Kabuki Education Week. So yeah, for the last 2 years, I've lived off Pacific time, trying to catch some of those. But for anyone listening who might not know your background in coaching, in writing, and kind of how you've progressed through your career, if you like, do you want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you hit all the major points. I was up until recently, I was a director of education for Kabuki Strength. I since then have left and started my own company. I've written for, I think, most major publications, so like T Nation, Breaking Muscle, Bar Bend, um, Kabuki, obviously, and things like that. And so most of what I do is, well, I guess now it's kind of 50-50. So previously, my role as director, I was primarily involved in essentially writing articles. I was responsible for the 2023 Kabuki Education Week, so lining up all the guests, organizing all the topics, and all that stuff. So it's kind of a really interesting experience to run that. Developed educational programs and curriculums. So like I developed their nutrition educational program. It's called like the Nutrition Masterclass, I believe. And then just developing different certification programs for other organizations and stuff like that. But right now with my own company is primarily a coaching and education company because it's still relatively new, just a couple months old. It's primarily coaching. And then as I kind of expand and continue to grow the business, it'll eventually move into the education side of things and have different courses and stuff like that. But yeah, that's pretty much the long and the short of it.
Oh, cool. And with the, I know you've mentioned there quite a lot about the education side of things and especially the writing side of
Mhm.
things as well. I was lucky enough to have and speak with Andrew Coates, who obviously, does
Yep.
quite a lot of quite a lot of writing. How did you, was writing something that you always wanted to gravitate towards, or did it just naturally happen? How do you kind of find that?
Uh, no, it wasn't. To be honest, I didn't think that I would be able to do it. Is really what it was. And Andrew, so Andrew Coates, he's a good friend of mine, and I saw him getting published on T Nation and a couple other places, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. Um, so I just reached out to him and I was like, hey, like, how did you make that work? Because I just had no idea how the whole process went down. And so he kind of gave me some advice. He's like, hey, I think it's a good idea to, reach out, connect to these people, connect to the editors, really like review what the website does and the kind of content they put out, their voice and all stuff, and build relationships over time. And eventually they just asked, Andrew to write for them. So he's like, that's kind of what I recommend you do. And I was like, I'm not a big fan of that. So I'm just gonna do it my own way. Um, because I'm not a big fan of like, and I'm not saying this is what he did because this is more his personality,
Mm.
right? And that just wasn't aligned with my personality and approach to things. So I think his advice was good for people who had that type of temperament. But I just was like, you know what? I'm not really a fan of building relationships if I'm trying to get something out of it.
Mhm.
Because to me, that just seems like it's inauthentic for my personality. Andrew, he's friends with everyone. And that's like his thing. So for him, it really works. For me, it didn't because I had kind of ulterior motives. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to submit an article directly, and then see what they say.
Yeah.
So I only really know one of the editors that I work with, and I
Right.
don't really know her well. Like Danny Sugart is the editor for T Nation. I don't know if we've ever had a real conversation. Um, so I just submitted an article to I think it was Breaking Muscle, and then it got approved, and I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. And then I submitted another one that got approved, and then I submitted another one to another publication that got approved. And I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. And so I just kept doing it, and I guess I had an aptitude for it. And then I started getting recognized on like other media outlets. So like the PTDC has like a article of the week, article of the year, and I kept winning article of the week, and I had no idea. People would just be actually Andrew was the one who would like tell me about it.
Right.
He'd be like, "Hey man, you just won like best fitness article of the week, or best this and that," and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." And then I was named as like uh, one of the best articles of the year or whatever, and I was like, "Oh, this is pretty cool." So I guess I have a bit of an aptitude for it, but I honestly didn't think that I was good at it at all until like several years later when I started being called out by like Stronger by Science, featured one of my articles, whatever, on their podcast, and people were telling me about how their editing process works, how it's like a very lengthy back and forth with the editor and blah blah blah. And I was like, I've never done that. I just submit an article and then just gets published as is. So um, I think that I think it was just lucky on my part, and then I also think that I had an aptitude that I wasn't necessarily aware of, and then over the years, you just become a little bit better and a little bit better, and things like that. And so um, that was honestly my process. So I'd say it was somewhat unconventional, maybe,
Yeah.
but seemed to work for me and sort of my mentality, I guess.
Ah, cool. I like. I know we started off with a little bit of a tangent there, but I actually had a conversation with a coach that I actually used to. I used to play rugby with him. Actually, I never actually worked with him. We were talking about sort of like long form content,
Mhm.
and I always like to ask that question because I think a lot of people try to write, but I think there's a difference there in terms of the quality that you're putting out. And I know some of the articles and blogs that you put out there, I still like to read the articles, rather than just having 15-second clips on Instagram or anything like that. I think it's useful to have a little bit more context and information
Yeah.
around it. That kind of dives into the topics that I sent over when obviously we were booking the podcast in. And one of the posts, obviously, a longer post that you put out there, which I think is from a coach's point of view, comes up quite a lot when we're speaking to clients in terms of taking ownership and responsibility of their health. And I just kind of wanted to touch on what your thoughts were or experience from that was.
Sorry, what was the question exactly?
So when we're talking about having ownership and responsibility for
Mhm.
our own health, there's a couple of variables that can go from there. But when you've worked with clients or the post that you shared from there, what was kind of your thought process behind that?
Um, around how sorry, I don't recall the specific post that you're talking about, but are you asking like what my thought process is regarding how I communicate personal responsibility or develop that with clients?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Maybe I'm a little spacey today. Um, yeah, so essentially I break it down as simply as possible, because dieting is a skill. So that's the first thing I communicate to people. I say dieting is a skill. Developing your lifestyle in a particular way is a skill. Because one of the things I always hear, from other people are like, oh, well, it's easy for you because you work from home and this and this and this. It's like, look, motherfucker, I didn't always work from home. Like, this isn't just random. I didn't randomly just fall into working from home. Like, I had to put in a shitload of hours and a shitload of time researching and developing and putting myself out there doing a podcast. I've got 107 podcast episodes on my own podcast. How many people look at that? I've written like I don't know 70 articles or something like that for different publications, or I don't know how many, but it's a lot. And I've written for a lot of different publications too. And so, I put in all this time so that now I can work for myself and I can do these things. And that process so far, like I've been when I first became a coach in 2012, so it's 11 years now, right? So it's not like I just randomly fell into this and I'm really fortunate. It's like the majority of that time well, actually, that's not true. I was working for myself the majority of the time, but even still, like I was putting in crazy hours, and so like, I don't know. I think a lot of what people say is just bullshit. It's just excuses, you know, and that's not to say that the obstacles that they're facing aren't real. It's just to say that there's always going to be a trade-off, and you can make decisions for yourself. And if you're just going to sit here and be like, oh, well, I have kids, so I can't do that. Plenty of people have kids who are super fit, really jacked, crazy strong. Some of the top level athletes in the world have children. Oh, well, my work is really busy. Okay, I know tons of people who are entrepreneurs or who are business owners. Like I have a small business and I've been crazy busy as well. So it's like that's not really a good excuse. So really, when you boil it down to it, to the bottom of it, it's like people can either choose to take responsibility and take ownership, or they cannot. And that doesn't mean that taking ownership is not like, oh, everything is an excuse. Therefore, if you're not able to do something, it's just because you don't want it bad enough. I don't believe that either. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle where it's like, hey, people face real challenges. Like if you have 3, 4 kids, that's a really big obstacle to overcome, but it doesn't mean that it's insurmountable. So what sort of solutions are going to be effective for you might be different than the next person because their context is different. So I always try and tell people like, look, developing a particular lifestyle, adapting your nutritional behaviors, and adopting a particular training routine is a skill set, right? It is to manage it. So it's a skill set. So once they kind of understand that, then we say, all right, let's have a look at where you're at. Let's take inventory of your current lifestyle. What are some things that we might want to drop? What are some things we might want to add in? And how can we balance that? And then once we have a good idea, then I'll try and explain that process to them. I'll say, okay, if you want to squat 500 pounds, you're not going to be able to just throw 500 pounds on the bar and then just do it. You might need to start at 225 and then do that for a couple reps. And then slowly over time, you build up your strength. And eventually, maybe you'll be able to squat 500 pounds. It's the same thing as, if you're going to school, you don't go into university and in your first semester, you write a master's thesis. That's not how it works. You build on subsequent, semesters, right? And the information is that you learn in semester number 2 is going to be predicated on what you learned in number 1 and so on and so forth, right? And so it's a developmental process and it doesn't happen all at once. And so we basically just do that and then we track metrics. I like to track behaviors personally. So, a behavior might be have 4 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, right? Combined servings. Or it might be get a certain step count, or it might be train X amount of times per week. Those are measurable behaviors. They don't necessarily tell us about all of the content of those behaviors. So it doesn't say that, hey, I got, high quality sessions in, but it does tell us that you did get X amount of training sessions in per week. And then once we start to kind of create some momentum with that, we slowly start to build out their profile or their plan, right? And it might take 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever. But over time, these behaviors just become very integrated and seamless, right? Very much like driving a car. At first, it was a bit, hectic. You're checking your mirrors and stuff like that. You're looking at your speed. You're doing a lot of different things. You're trying to shoulder check and make sure you're not crashing into anyone when you're merging onto a highway. But then over time, people fucking be texting and driving with their knees and they're fine. Again, I'm not advocating for that, but it just becomes so mindless over time that you don't really have to think about it. It's just on autopilot a lot of the times. And so that's essentially where you want to get yourself to, or where you might want to get yourself to, again, depending on what your goals and priorities are. But really, it just is an iterative process like that, where you figure out a starting point and then slowly progress from there and make adjustments as needed.
Yeah, I think from and when I was explaining the question at the start, what I was trying to touch on is that I'm a big fan of an analogy, and in the post that you shared, and I remember having the conversation in the gym, and I thought it was pretty cool. It was kind of, if you walk down a dark alley and get robbed, yes, it was the robber's fault, but it was your responsibility. You took that risk, if you like, to walk down that dark alley, which I thought was really interesting. And when you're talking there about building up habits and trying to build behaviors, what's kind of, do you think that the excuses that sometimes people can bring up is because there's kind of a quick fix mentality, or they're comparing themselves to what other people are doing compared to, that other person in the gym who, a little bit like what you mentioned there in terms of the hours that you're putting in for your writing, for your coaching, to get yourself into a position where, you can control your time or efforts that you're putting in. Do you think there's just that quick fix mentality, and too often people are just comparing to it about, oh well, I'll never be like that person, so I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to try and progress. If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, I think it's for sort of a multitude of reasons. I think that the ones that are most common that I run into, anyways, um, are first and foremost, people drastically underestimate the amount of effort and time required to accomplish a certain goal. So, that I think that's one of the reasons why the 90-day transformations are so popular. They're like, okay, fuck, I can, work super hard for 90 days and then that's just it. Because anyone can work hard for 90 days. Like if you look at the data, we don't have a weight loss problem. Most people, the overwhelming majority of people successfully lose weight, but they can't keep it off.
Mm.
So we don't have a weight loss issue, we have a sustainability issue. And those are two very different things, right? And it's important to understand that when we're having this conversation. So if we're just talking about weight loss, body composition, stuff like that, we don't have a weight loss problem. We have a sustainability issue. And part of that is because people don't necessarily understand how the process works. They don't understand like if you were to say, okay, what's a fast rate of weight loss? Or what's a slow rate of weight loss? What's a moderate rate of weight loss? They would have no fucking idea and they'd just be guessing, right? And so the fact that they don't know right off the bat, but they have a preconceived notion of what a successful 90-day transformation would look like, it's like, okay, you've just arbitrarily determined that this is good and this is bad, but you have no fucking clue what you're talking about. That would be like me going into the stock market, making a 300% return on investment, and then being like, oh, well, it wasn't 700. It's like, dude, like you don't understand what you're talking about. And so I think that's a big problem because if you don't understand how things work, you don't know how to evaluate whether or not what you're doing is effective. Like if I tell someone, hey, losing at a clip of 1% per week is really fucking good. That's very good. And that's very sustainable. And you'll be able to maintain your performance. So most of my athletes are performance-based athletes, strength athletes like powerlifters, strongmen, weightlifters, or like some sort of endurance performance athletes. So they need to sustain their performance, and their body composition is just there to facilitate that. And sure, they might have some like aesthetic goals that they want to accomplish, but that's way down the line. Their performance is their number one priority. So how do we do that while sustaining performance? How do we do that while creating sustainability throughout this entire process? And that really changes the approach, because if the goal is just to get X lean, fuck, anyone could do that. But if the goal is to get this lean without harming your performance, without being like, oh my god, I hate my life, and being miserable and having all this stuff, that's a very different story. So how you gauge success is going to be largely predicated on what their assumptions are about how the process works. So education is a really, really big part of the process. At least when I'm coaching an athlete, I'm constantly trying to educate. Every single week when I do my video review check-in, I'm always educating. Hey, you did a great job here. Hey, this is something that we're kind of lacking, and the reason why I want you to do this is because this is going to affect this, and da da da. So I'm always trying to communicate those things. So I think that's a really big obstacle, is people just don't know what the fuck they're talking about, and they get bad information from a lot of different places. And so they need to understand how the process actually works. And so that's a big barrier. The second barrier is they underestimate how much time and effort is actually required. I hear people being like, oh, not everyone can have a six-pack. Bullshit. Bullshit. Almost everyone can have a six-pack. Is it going to like, and you can make the argument about like, oh, well, like, because not everyone has the visibility of the abdominals and they're not going to hypertrophy the same. Like, get the fuck out of here. Everyone can be lean. Virtually everyone can be lean, barring some very rare, maybe like health or metabolic conditions or whatever. Virtually everyone can be very lean. And like, you don't need to really look at any research to know that. All you need to do is be like, okay, how fat were people in the 30s? Is way fucking less than what you see right now. And it's like, okay, so you're telling me all of that is due to genetic adaptations? Get the fuck out of here. Come on. It's just not the case. So most of the people who are struggling with being overweight and stuff like that, this is a lifestyle issue. It's not a genetic condition in the overwhelming majority of cases. So if you're listening to this podcast, there's like almost 100% certainty that you don't fall into that category of the rare condition. And so that's a big part of it. The next part is, I think that just as a society right now, especially, so I'm living in Canada at the moment, and I think in Canada and also the US, I was living in the US when I was working with Kabuki, there is just this massive push to turn people into pussies and to like, tell everyone that, oh, it's not your fault. Oh, you did your best. Oh, here's a participation trophy, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, like sports are exclusive by their very nature. You don't run 100 meters in this time, guess what? You're not on the fucking team. Practice and then come back in. It's a meritocracy, right? Sports are based on a meritocracy. And unfortunately, right now, that's sort of shifting where, people are being awarded prizes and positions not based on merit, but based on other arbitrary factors that shouldn't even be in the discussion. And so it's like when you have this, like a world being like, oh no, you're perfect just the way you are. You can be healthy at every size. You can this, you can that. It just turns people into pussies is really what it is. And like, it's funny because a lot of people will come at me and be like, oh, well, you're just like, what do you call it? Like, you're a tough love type of coach. And I'm like, anyone who's ever worked with me as a client will tell you that I'm incredibly soft spoken when I'm working with athletes. I will never raise my voice. I don't swear. I'm incredibly understanding. I'm incredibly patient. Like, these are things that I constantly get as feedback.
Yeah.
So I don't do the whole tough love thing. But at the same time, you're not going to fucking piss on me and telling me it's raining.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, like, I'm going to be honest with you and I'm going to be respectful and I'm not going to like put people down or shame it. Like, it's just not my personality. So I don't think that it's one or the other. It's not like either you just coddle people or you're an asshole and shame everyone into the result that they want and give them a complex. Like, it's idiotic that that's the way it's being framed, but that is the way that it's being framed. Oh, we need to be so nice to people. We need to be this. We need to be that. No, you know what? You need to treat people like adults.
Mhm.
You need to treat them like they can actually handle this, like they're intelligent, like they have autonomy and agency over their own lives, and they can, make decisions, and that they can get better and they can grow. The moment that you start telling people like, oh, well, we don't want to do this because we're going to hurt their feelings and that can cause, it's like you don't even respect them anymore.
Yeah.
Like, what you're telling them is, I don't think that you're smart or capable enough to actually do this, so I'm just going to lie to you to make you feel better. That's what it says to me, anyways. So I think that's a really big problem. And the moment we start telling people like, oh, you did your best, and like, oh, it's okay to be overweight, it's okay this. No, it's not okay to be overweight. It's not. And it's not because you look a particular way, but it's because you're going to fucking die by the time you're 60.
Yeah.
You're going to die by the time you're 30 or 40. How many 400-pound individuals do you see living past 40 years old? I know zero. I don't know if there are any,
Yeah.
because it's like that's insanely unhealthy. And obesity is a chronic health issue, which means that if you're obese and you're like, let's say, in your early 20s, your biomarkers might actually be reasonably good. You might have perfectly fine biomarkers. What do they look like in your late 20s, in your early 30s, in your late 30s? Guess what? They're going to plummet because the disease is chronic. So the longer you are in the state, the greater the risk of dying is. And if you're obese, I think, what is it, your health risk goes up by 1.4, so you're 40% more likely to die at any point in time in your life than an individual who's at a healthier body weight. I'm pretty sure it's 1.4 is the health risk, off the top of my head, but it's significant, and people try and downplay that, and people try and like just pretend like everything's always okay, and it's like, man, the world is not fair. Shitty things happen to all people all the time. Like, all you're doing by trying to coddle people and make them just feel good and creating these safe spaces, all you're doing is making people less resilient and weaker.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you should be a dick to people. I'm not saying that you should, you know, like treat people poorly if they're overweight or if they look a certain way. That's not the thing to do. But it's certainly not the thing to do to tell them that they're going to be healthy if they're fucking 40% body fat. That's not healthy either. That's dangerous, because now you're giving this person like this false understanding of what health actually is.
Yeah.
you know And so the reluctance of individuals to talk about difficult things in in the name of sparing people's feelings is bullshit. I don't believe that it's true. I don't believe that people have any good intentions by doing that. I think that they're just afraid of being seen as negative, being afraid to be called out, being afraid to be labeled something nasty, and potentially get like censored or whatever. I think that's really what it is. And it's bullshit and it's not helping anyone.
Yeah, I think there was just touching on a couple of points that you've mentioned there. I think the education side of things is really important, because sometimes people will just do things and they have no reason why. They never, or they might be working with a coach and never question. So why am I doing this? Why is it I'm doing that? Because that phrase of give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, and he'll do it for the rest of his life. I think
Yeah.
one thing that I thought was really good that what you mentioned there was the skill side of things. Developing habits and behaviors is a skill. Exactly the same as learning how to squat bench and deadlift or log press or whatever it may
Yeah.
be. There's skills to it. I think as well, what's really interesting, this might turn into a little bit of a tangent, but everything that you're saying there, what I was thinking in my head was, actually had a consultation a couple of weeks ago. The guy was, severely overweight. He had been quite sporty in his youth, had an injury, and his injury got worse. Basically stopped training, put on quite a lot of weight. In the consultation, it was basically because you're getting heavier, it's making your knee worse because you're carrying, too much weight around. That's not to say, oh my God, like why have you let yourself got to this point? I think it is just a case of having that honesty and just, he knows he's overweight. I know he's overweight. So it's a case of, look, these are the facts. And do you think sometimes maybe flipping to a coach's point of view, do you think sometimes coaches want to brush over that to try and make the sale and try and be a jack of all trades rather than, like what you've said there, have that honesty and be like, look, this is what we need to work on, and showing them the respect that they deserve to be like, right, this is how I can help, this is what we need to do to get from point A to point B.
I mean, maybe, I can't speak for anyone else other than myself.
Yeah.
Right. But what I could definitely say is there is definitely a pretty strong push to pretend like being overweight is perfectly fine. Like, look at Hayes, the whole healthy at every size movement. Look at body positivity and all these things. Like, and a lot of these things start out with really beneficial intent, with like a good intent of, hey, you know what? These people are human beings. They should be treated with dignity. They should be treated with respect. They shouldn't be discriminated against, especially in healthcare, right? Like that's a big problem. A lot of people might not know this, but you know, when someone who's overweight is seeking like medical help, a lot of the times they're actually shunned from getting the proper treatment, right? And if someone who's like at risk of dying in the next couple of years needs to get medication, but the doctor's like, no, I'm not going to give you medication until you lose a certain amount of weight. It's like, dude, at the moment, medication is going to be the most important thing for them,
Yeah.
And so there is discrimination. They do face that. So these are barriers, and I think that these movements start out with good intentions, but almost always they get hijacked by people who are just like, raving lunatics who just want to push some sort of self-serving agenda, right? So I think that that's really problematic, and I think that coaches, like everyone else, not just coaches, but people in general, get worried about the mob. They get worried about being canceled on social media, whatever the fuck that means. It's like you can't cancel people in real life. Like, okay, I don't have an Instagram account. All right, I guess I'm just going to go on living my life. Who gives a shit, right? So I think people are worried about that. They're worried about being labeled in a particular way. They're worried about being like censored. They're worrying about their reputation. And those are all really valid concerns. But I think that at the same time, they do prevent people from actually doing what's best for the client, in some cases anyways. I don't know if that's a huge problem among coaches, because like I said, I can only speak for myself and I can only speak for the people who I know personally. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's a point of maybe sensitivity that the coaches might avoid having some of those more difficult conversations. But I also think that a lot of that stuff kind of comes with experience and the development of a good quality relationship with your clients. So I've got a pretty good relationship with my clients because like they know that I care. Like if anyone were to watch my video reviews, like I'm very thorough. Everyone has my cell number. They can text me at whatever time. I answer questions like within, like an hour or two or something like that. Um, so I'm available, and they know that I genuinely care. And I'll be honest with them. Like, I have told people sometimes, like, hey, you know what? I don't think that you're really into this. Um, Maybe weight training just isn't for you, or maybe I'm not the right coach for you. And sometimes, like, I'd say it's pretty rare that I actually have to have those conversations, but there have been instances where I have said that, and I've actually referred them to someone else. And then they start sending me referrals because they're like, oh, wow, this guy's like, he actually just cares about me
Yeah.
more than his bank account. And I think that a lot of that times that comes with like experience and actually being in like a good place. Whereas if you're kind of a struggling coach, then maybe you kind of have to just do whatever you need to do to keep the
Yeah.
client, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's not a good position to be in for sure, but I've definitely been there. So I'm not going to like point fingers at anyone. Um, but I don't know. Sorry, I'm not sure if I answered your question. I've just
No,
kind of
I
been
think,
like ranting a
yeah.
lot.
No, no. One thing that you mentioned then, it's again a similar conversation that I've had before of sort of like the life cycle of a coach. I always go back to when I very first started coaching. I used to say everything, try and just unload as much information as I can, in coaching in person. And then all of a sudden, you actually refine your skills a little bit more, and that does come with experience, especially probably more so with the exercise side of things and the nutrition side of things. But in terms of managing the person, those I think it's the softer skills, if you like, of knowing when to be like a little bit more firm, or when to
Mhm.
say things that need to be done. Is that something that when we're talking about skill development, is that something that I think the book that I've started listening to on Audible is how to win friends, how to win friends and influence
Win
people, or
friends and
something
influence
like
people, yeah.
that. And it's that thing of you can listen to that and then try and apply it. Is that something that you've done to develop um your softer coaching skills, if you like, or does that just generally come from experience for kind of the younger coaches listening?
It's definitely a skill like that you have to work. So I think that a lot of, let's say, like more technical deficits in a coach's skill set can be somewhat like made up for by having just really good relationship and communication skills. Because maybe you're the best coach and you know the most scientific whatever, but you need buy-in from a client. And like, so here's a parallel example. One of the one of the most important determining factors of whether or not a psychological, like, so if you're seeing a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist, one of the most important determining factors of whether or not that intervention is going to be successful or not is the relationship that you have with your clinician, right? Which is surprising, but also unsurprising at the same time, because it's like you have to trust the person. You have to be comfortable sharing really deeply personal things that probably are fairly painful. And when it comes to fitness, it's also probably pretty similar. Like, I have athletes who compete at a high level, very high level, who also have dealt with a lot of like, what is it, like sort of self-esteem issues.
Right.
They've dealt with eating disorders, or maybe like whether they're full blown, like clinically diagnosed, or subclinical. I've dealt with individuals who have gone through like divorce, and who have gone through like having to move, who've lost their job, who've been devastated financially because their portfolio just crumbled within like a week. So these are things that really, really can just devastate people.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't feel comfortable enough to tell you what's going on, then you can't help adapt the approach that you're taking in order to get them to their goals. Now, I know that might sound kind of odd to hear, but at the same time, like, stress really matters in performance, not just in performance, but in body composition, and it, more importantly, in adherence, right? Because if you are getting divorced and you're having to figure out where you're going to live now, I don't care how dedicated you are, that's going to pull your mind away from your training.
Yeah.
You're just very likely not going to be as invested. You're very likely not going to be pushing to the same level. You're going to have other shit that you want to sort out. And, at that point, the question is, okay, what do we need to do right now to keep you moving forward, or maybe it's so bad that we need to just do damage control so that we stay at the same point and don't regress, right? So how do you have those conversations if your athlete doesn't trust you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think that if you have those conversations, if you have that type of relationship, they're going to feel more comfortable sharing stuff with you. And, they'll, once they do that, you can adjust the program accordingly. You can scale it up, you can scale it down, you can put things on pause temporarily. You can suggest, like, hey, maybe we just need to stop this altogether and you need to just kind of eat in a more informed approach. And I can give you some very simple guidelines, but maybe we just kind of stop the nutrition side of things for the time being, put that on pause, remain weight stable, have one or two priorities that maybe we're checking off, and that way we're not, doing any damage. But like, you can't do that unless you have the ability to connect with an individual, to empathize with them, to communicate with them, and they have to feel like you genuinely care about you, and that's real difficult. Like, it really is, especially someone like me. Like, I for a long, I mean, I still have it, I guess, technically, but I would say that it doesn't really affect me anymore. Was I dealt with CPTSD, right? So complex dissociative PTSD. And so essentially your ability to empathize with other individuals is significantly stifled. Like, someone would be like pouring their heart out to me and I would just be like, I don't understand. Like, I don't get it. And so you have to really work on it and learn how to do those things and learn how to empathize, learn how to connect. Um, and so it is difficult, or at least it was for me. Maybe for some people it comes more naturally, but it's definitely something you can work on. And it's probably one of the most important skills of being a good coach, because realistically, like, as a coach, 95% of the shit that you know and you learn, probably not even going to use. Like, when you're learning about like cellular metabolism and all this stuff, and like, you could probably get an athlete just as far with 80% less knowledge, so long as you're just implementing it appropriately. And it's like, does that mean you shouldn't constantly be learning? No, that's not what I'm saying. But like, most of the shit we know as coaches, you're never going to use, or
Yeah.
you maybe use once every couple of years, So I think that the soft skills and the soft skill side of coaching is incredibly important. And I do think that there has been a bit more of a push, especially in the last like year or two, to really emphasize that in a coaching practice.
Yeah, I think and why I thought that was really really good what you mentioned there about the softer skills. I know I know it seems like an age away now, the COVID, but listened to a lot more about how to develop those skills a little bit more, because gyms were closed and those sorts of things. And I think going back to what you touched on before, actually speaking to clients and athletes as they are adults, be able to speak to them. And I think it's like a little bit of a pendulum. You start off thinking everything that you learn is going to be really important, and then it flips where most of the times that we're talking about training or anything like that, you'd speak to other coaches around, whereas usually the client or the athlete wants to know, is this going to get me to where I want to be? Is this going to be in line with my vision of where I see myself, at this competition or at this event or whatever it may be? Because actually what sticks in my mind is a previous gym that I used to work at. I used to always think, I've got more knowledge than you as a coach. Why are your clients and athletes staying with you so much? Like, your programming is atrocious. It's because or I felt that I was thinking, what's he doing so different? And it just came down to that communication side of things. When they came in for a session, when he messaged them, he put all of his efforts into that person and had really good communication skills, which I think is like what you've said is overlooked a little bit. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, obviously, we've spoken about the ownership and the responsibility side of things. But one thing you mentioned about was when people are wanting to associate themselves to a certain group or something like that. And I just kind of wanted to touch on environment and how that can. What's the pros and cons of the environment that you're in? A little bit like what you mentioned about if we're not setting expectations or setting standards, if you like, if we're just sort of wrapping people up in cotton wool. What's kind of your take of the pros and cons of a successful environment, if you like?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a platitude, but I think it's a fairly accurate platitude. You're the sum of your best five friends, or the five people you spend the most time with, or whatever it is, right? But like, that's really true. You go to a and so here's a perfect example, a personal example, actually. So I was prepping for nationals in 2021, powerlifting nationals, and my gym was closed for an event, and I train at a private club. So to put things in perspective, every single person who competes there is at a bare minimum national level. Bare minimum. We've got five guys who deadlift over 800 pounds. There's one dude who deadlifts 826 and he only weighs 83 kilos. Like, we have a dude who squatted 1,003, which makes him the heaviest squat in Canadian history. Every chick there deadlifts over 400 pounds. Like, it's a strong, strong fucking gym.
Yeah.
If you squat 600, deadlift 700, and bench 400, you're an average lifter there, right? So that's just to put things into perspective. It's a private club, right? I went to that gym was closed. So me and a friend of mine went to a kind of like a bodybuilding gym that was also in town that was open. So I go there and I start doing some front squats, and I'm on a deload, right? And so I'm doing, I think, like 440 for a set of 5 on front squats. And um everyone is like looking at me like, oh man, like, you gonna come and train here? And I was like, I felt so good about myself. I felt like, like I had the biggest dick in the world. I was like, fuck yeah. And then I went there the second day, right, to train, because again, the gym was closed. And same thing, people were like patting me on the back. And when I left, I was like, I will never train here again. I refuse. Because, like, instantly I knew, I was like, I'm not going to get any better, because these guys are pumping me up and I don't deserve that yet. Like, I haven't reached the crazy, like, I haven't reached the level that I want yet. And these guys are just going to make me like feel really good, and I'm not going to want to work as hard. They're just going to be like, oh no, you're doing awesome, blah blah. They're just like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the other gym, no matter what you do, it's not good enough.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, fuck, awesome job, a little fist bump, whatever, after you hit like a big PR. But then they still troll you. They're like, oh well, I mean, you hit this, but you didn't hit that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, and everyone around you is just a savage, and they're so strong. So they just bring you up. They force you to be better. Whereas in this, it's like, if I go there and I'm like one of the stronger guys there, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
I'm not going to get the same results. So I think that the people you spend time with are incredibly important. And I think that it's really, really important to have friends who are willing to be honest with you and willing to tell you shit that is going to suck, that's going to hurt. So like, one of the exercises that I do still every single year, and I've actually started doing it probably once every 6 months now, is I ask like all my closest friends who, one, I really respect their judgment, I trust them, we're very close and they know a lot about me, but also they're successful in specific ways that I want to be successful. So I ask them, I'm like, hey, what are my biggest strengths and weaknesses? And it's almost never, at least for me, it's almost never what you think that it's going to be. It's never like, oh, well, I think sometimes you're like a little rude. It's like, it's stuff that really cuts to your heart. And it sucks, and it can be super painful. It can be really hurtful, but at the same time, it's so necessary, because now I can be better,
Yeah.
because they're willing to tell me my blind spots. And if you don't have friends who are willing to do that for you, then you're just going to be stuck, you know? And the thing is, they expect the same from me. They expect me to be honest with them. They expect me to call them out when they're slipping. And if you have people like that that just hold you to a higher standard, you can't help but be better. Because if you don't become better, they're just going to drop you. Like,
Yeah.
you're not going to be part of their group. It's the same thing at like our lifting club at the Strength Edge in Calgary, right? Like, there have been, like, we're a really friendly group, and you don't need to be crazy strong to train there. Like, you could be a complete beginner and still train there and still get just as much attention and be hyped up as the guy who's squatting like 900 pounds, right? But only if you're there to work. If you're there to just fucking slack off, you are going to get trolled so hard you will leave, because you'll be like, these guys are assholes. But it's because we don't want you there if you're like that. We don't want you fucking poisoning the well. We're here to work hard. We're here to get better. And that's really important. So when you have a community who does that for you, that's so goddamn important. Probably it might even be more important than your actual programming, I believe, you know, is the environment that you're in. And I know some people might be like, "Oh, you're a fucking idiot for saying that," but how many people got crazy strong knowing fuck all about training or programming? Lots of people, just because they work super hard and they focus on some of the basics. And so I think it's really, really important to have those people in your life. I think it's really important to, be about that. So it's like if you're wanting to, be fit and you're wanting to do all the stuff, and like all you're spending time with people who are like all overweight, none of them care about their health, they all party. I'm not saying that that's bad. Like I have friends who party all the time, who drink, who don't share the same values as me, but we're also just not going to be that close because we've got two different, like our values are just too different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if you want to be a certain way, just look at the people who are doing that and be like, okay, why are they that way? What else do they do? Just hang around them a little bit more and you'll kind of find out and it'll start to rub off on you. So I think that it's really, really important that you be mindful of who you're spending the most time with. Um, so yeah.
I think the best phrase or the best quote that I like for that is surround yourself with like-minded people and great things will happen. And actually,
Yeah.
again, a conversation that I had a couple of weeks ago is that sometimes people don't actually realize their potential. They might be training with certain people and it might actually be holding them back. They actually go into, a different gym, train with different people, who essentially are stronger or fitter than them. And then all of a sudden, their game is raised a little bit. And everything that you've mentioned there of, oh, you lifted this, but you didn't lift this weight. That doesn't come from a place of I'm better than you. It's a case of, well, let's get to that next weight. Let's push to do that because that creates that excitement to want to develop, which I think is really important with that side of thing, because sometimes people can think a lot of people can leave an environment like that and think, oh no, actually, how does that kind of impact the mindset side of things? Is that because they're maybe not ready to push themselves or take that next step and push out of their comfort zone, or is it just a case of actually their values don't line up with that? If that kind of makes sense around the mindset side of things.
I mean, it could be both, right? So like for instance, some people who lift go crazy, right? Like they're like yelling and screaming. Like there's this one guy I know, Justin Zottel. He's crazy strong, super good athlete, but he goes fucking nuts. Like he amps himself up for like 6 hours. And I'm like, I don't know how you do that without dying. Like I'd have a heart attack, right? And he's an acquaintance of mine. But like I said, very, very strong athlete, crazy strong, one of the strongest guys in Canada. But I could never do that. And so if I was in a gym where everyone was like that, I would just get exhausted. It's too much, you know? So I'm always really calm when I lift. Like I'm super, super calm when I lift. I'm just chilling there. I'm relaxed, but that's because I'm always like amped up. So I need to stay calm. So I think that sometimes there's just temperamental differences. And if you don't vibe with that group, it's not that the group is bad or you're bad. It's just that sometimes you just need a different environment. Right. And so, but luckily there's plenty of gyms and there's plenty of different environments. I'm sure you're going to fit into one. Okay. So that's the first thing. I think that another thing is it also is, yeah, some people just don't have the same values. They just don't want to work hard. And when they get exposed to that environment, they find out real quickly who they are. And they're like, oh, this is too uncomfortable. I'm just going to bounce. And it's like, dude, if you would have just stayed for 3 months, you're struggling to hang right now, but you'd be able to hang in a couple of months, and then you'd be part of the group. It's kind of like hazing. You know what I mean? Like whether you think hazing is good or bad, it goes too far, this, that, the other. The reality is hazing is actually important. There's actually an evolutionary basis to hazing. Um, and it's super, super important to weed out people who don't belong. Now I'm not going to make a judgment call on like what is okay and what's not okay and whatever. But just the basic idea of kind of screening people and filtering people is super important. So, we have people who come in, and there's only been like there's one guy who we forced out very quickly because he was just a real piece of shit. Everyone in my gym is like quite humble, and they're really great athletes. And this one guy comes in who's never accomplished anything, never even competed in powerlifting, comes in, literally the first thing he says is like, oh, what was it? He's like, oh, I bet I'm faster than everyone here. It's like,
Right.
okay, cool. Like who gives a shit? And then he keeps telling people like how strong he is and like, oh, like I'm so strong for my age. And he's like a younger kid and it's like he's like 21 or whatever. And it's like, okay. And then at one point he said something to one of my athletes and another girl who was there. So two girls. And this is a big football player. Like he's bigger than me. He's like 290 or something like that, you know? And he's like, "Oh yeah, well you guys are only strong because you're small, right?" And these two chicks are actually incredibly strong. So the one, she's 57 kilos, she deadlifted 190 kilos,
Wow.
you know, and she'll deadlift over 200 kilos at the American Pro in the next little bit. The other girl is also crazy strong. She benches over 225, like 235, I think, and she's like a 67 kilo or something like that, or 65, something like that. So they're both really strong, and he's like chirping them. Meanwhile, they're literally stronger than he is, right? Relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And so then when I found that out, I just pulled him aside and I was like, "Hey, get the fuck out! Like you're done. Like don't be fucking talking shit. Don't ever say anything to me. Don't ever say anything to this person." I was like, "You're done. Just get the fuck out." Like, you know, because it's just like we're not having that. We're here to support each other. If you want to try and point fingers and you want to pretend that you're better than other people, then you don't belong here. But that was the only time I've ever had that, right? And so I think for the most part, if you're around those people, like they can really rub off on you. And I think that it's super, super important to be able to kind of weed people out.
Yeah. I think with that, it kind of on the for the most part, like what you said there, the especially from so a background to myself from me playing more of a team sport in rugby and then gravitating towards powerlifting when I couldn't play as much rugby anymore. It's completely different. Everybody from national, international lifters all the way to people who are doing the first competition. Everyone wants to see people do well, which I think is a great
Yeah.
environment. Everyone wants people to push and get better, but it's it is that supportive nature. I think the minority, which I think gets built up a little bit too much, is the example that you've used there of people who just want to throw it around a little bit and have a little bit of ego. But what I would say from that is he will never get better. He will never progress from there because
Mhm.
he just wants to go into the gym and be like, well, look what I can do right now, and he'll just keep dotting around. Whereas other people will progress and keep developing because of the environment, like what we touched on. Quite a lot of topics and a few tangents thrown in there. But really enjoyed chatting with you today. The last question that I like to ask from everything that we've chatted about there, and for everyone listening, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
Um, I guess like to recap everything, I think it's really important to understand that everything is a process. Like you're not going to be really good at something just because you're dedicated or disciplined. Like you could be doing something 100% perfectly and you're still not going to be great at it for a while. It's going to take a long time. So one, expect that it's going to be harder and take longer than you anticipate, but if you stick with it, you're probably going to go a lot farther than you think you ever could, right? I think that's one really important thing. The next thing is in order to like get to a certain place, you have to construct your environment. And your environment is everything from your living situation, how you eat, the what you do in your spare time, the information that you consume, whether it be a bunch of social media or books where you're, like personal development books, or business related books. So that's really important as well. And then so are the people that you spend a lot of time with as well. Like they're either going to bring you up to their level or they're going to push you down or pull you down to their level. And so I think that it's really important to make sure that you have the right environment, you have the right community to support you, and you put in the work and you're just consistent. And you're not going to be perfect. You might be doing very, very little initially, but over time, little's going to build up to more and more and more. And eventually, you're going to, like I said in the beginning, be much, much farther than you ever thought you could. You'll accomplish much more than you ever thought you could. So it's really about patience, consistency, and dedication, and constructing your environment, having the right people around you. So hopefully that is a decent summation.
Yeah, I think that was a really good summary, and I think from everything that we've chatted about today, some really good take-home points from either a coach's point of view or a client or an athlete's point of view. So, thanks a lot, Daniel, for taking the time to jump on today. if anyone has any questions about what we've chatted about today, see the content or information that you put out there, or get involved in some coaching with you, where can people reach out to you and find you?
So Instagram is probably the best place that people can find me. That's where I'm most active. So my Instagram handle is Daniel_DeBrocke. I have a YouTube channel, Daniel_DeBrocke, and then a podcast, which is called the Stack Strength Podcast. That's where those three places are where I'm most active. But Instagram is definitely going to be the best way to reach me. So yeah, thanks so much for having me on, man. It was a great chat. I really appreciate you taking the time to reach out, and I appreciate the conversation.
No worries at all. Like I say, really enjoyed chatting with you today. I think there was some really good topics in there. So thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.